This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. For this episode, we're recording in Denver, but my guest is one I was hoping to talk to in his own brewery in northern Vermont earlier this year. A trip just didn't manifest itself, and so we took advantage of the opportunity to talk here at the Great American Beer Festival. Joining me is Vasily Gletsos from Wunderkammer Beer.
Perfect. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
We'll give you both pronunciations of Wunderkammer. Your brewery is based in Albany, Vermont.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. You got to come visit even sometime in the future.
I am absolutely. I've got a whole itinerary planned between northern Vermont and Montreal and back, and maybe even into New Hampshire to go see the Schilling folks. We're going to make this happen at some point.
Great.
But I didn't want to miss out on this conversation in the meantime. You know, Wunderkammer, is a special creative project for you, a realization of your own creative vision for what brewing can be, and heavy on a personal story, a foraging story, a technique, a culture, a brewing culture story, a story of place, and a artful story that's also inspired by your background in performance and play. And, the brewery kind of sums all of those things up. So we're going to talk about how that manifests itself in the beer that you make, both through a technical process and through your creative process behind beer.
Great.
Before we do that, for years, G&D Chillers has chilled the beers you love, partnering with 3,000 plus breweries across the country. They're proud of the cool partnerships they've built over the past 30 years. They know brewing doesn't stop at 5 o'clock, and nor do they. G&D uses quality components, expert craftsmanship, and constant innovation. With 24/7 service and support, your brewery will never stop. Remote monitor your chiller for simple and fast access to all the information you need. It provides you with the peace of mind your operation is running smoothly. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com or call to discuss your next project. This episode is also brought to you by BSG. Want a natural and economical clarification aid that doesn't impact beer flavor? Then you need Carry Biofine Eco. Developed as a part of Carry's Eco Brewing range, Biofine Eco is a plant-based fining agent that improves beer clarification by instant flocculation of yeast and trub. Available exclusively from BSG. Visit bsgcraftbrewing.com to learn more. And if you hear Old Orchard mentioned in the brewing community, don't be surprised. The flavored craft juice concentrate blends from Old Orchard have shipped to over 46 states. Their new brewing customers often mention discovering Old Orchard through the word-of-mouth recommendation of another brewer. To join the core of Old Orchard's brewing community, learn more at oldorchard.com/brewer. So Vasily, let's give me the Wunderkammer story, and or I should say, let's talk about your brewing story leading up to the Wunderkammer story. Track for me your experience in the brewing world, how you decided to become a professional brewer, and where that took you, which is apparently across the United States.
Yeah, exactly. I first came into contact with I wasn't actually much of a beer drinker as a younger college student and stuff like that. I really came into contact with brewing through fresh out of art school. I joined the Bread and Puppet Theater in rural Vermont and was a company member there. And there's a very heavy DIY culture there. People were gardening, making all kinds of things, including beer. And so somebody showed me how to make beer. I started off in the very kind of stupid way of trying to malt my own grains and doing all that, going very basic. But I started getting
you gotta walk before you can run in this one. But
exactly.
You just took off for a sprint. Huh?
No, absolutely. I wound up just getting every book I could from interlibrary loan through the library and talking to a health food store, getting actual brewing supplies, and taught myself all grain brewing from the beginning. That was at the same time as I was going on tour and trying different beers from different places. Like we would do a month-long stint in New York City at the Theater for the New City. And while I was down there, get out late at night and those bodegas are open into the late hours of the evening. So pick up one of 500 different kinds of beers that they had down there.
Sure.
Places like that is where I'd first experienced DuPont, first time I experienced Baltic Porter, and really got an idea of the breadth of the spectrum of what beer could be, you know. I went to college in Portland, Maine, which is a great brewing city itself, but they were, you know, it's all kind of Ringwood brew pub style stuff, which is fine, but I didn't have that same perspective.
It looks different now than it did then.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, so that's kind of where I picked up brewing in the first place. And also while I was there, of course, I was performing with the theater, and I was also foraging quite a bit. I'd sort of taught myself mushroom foraging, and just sort of, that was for me a very important gateway into nature. Like, you know, I'd been an avid hiker and stuff as a kid, but sort of breaking that wall of like trees that I don't know anything about, or that objective of getting to the top of the mountain and actually like engaging with the landscape in that kind of way, like looking around, up, under, below, all that kind of stuff, and finding all the sort of awe-inspiring stuff that was out there.
And so that started to play a role in your brewing even then. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, everything from making mushroom stouts and, you know, adding all kinds of herbs and fruits. And there's, you know, where I live in Vermont, there's not the same range of fruits and vegetables available that you might find. Like, for example, there's very limited stone fruit. And so I just got really interested in the sort of native berries, and was making like what they call like family wines, like vegetable wines and fruit wines and stuff like that. And and just started really exploring the stuff at hand.
What made you take a step away from puppetry and into professional brewing?
Yeah, as it turns out, it's a lot more financially stable.
And that is such a relative statement.
Yeah. At that point, I'd moved out with my partner to Portland, Oregon, with the vague idea of continuing in puppet theater. But at the same time, I was a really avid home brewer, and just the sort of dynamicism of that brewing community out there on all levels, from home brewing to professional, was really dynamic. So
it's contagious.
Yeah.
Sure. I was just out there last week, and you know, between the creative attitudes and the spirit of the brewers, it's just still a beautiful place.
Oh, it is the best brewing community too. I love all those people.
Yeah. I believe it. So you started working professionally as a brewer. Yeah.
Started my first job. First couple jobs were through different brew pub chains up there, but you know, they were kind of not necessarily so remarkable in the brewery themselves as much as the brewers that I got to work with.
Yeah.
And they went on to do really great things in Portland itself. And I thought for what those brew pubs were, it was really great. You know, I worked with some of the directors of quality control. So I felt like I got, like with my art school training, a really solid foundation in brewing practice.
So what was the moment where you knew that this was going to be the career that you were going to continue to follow and dive deeper into?
Oh, I mean, for me, since the beginning, just it was what I always found so engaging was it really incorporates both hemispheres of the brain. My father and brother come from science backgrounds. Me and my other brother come from art backgrounds, and just that sort of satisfied both of those together. And not just that, but also, I mean, there's a fair amount of schlep work to be done in a brewery as well. And I really enjoyed working with my hands and having that break up the monotony of, you know, what I'm trying to figure out how to do in the brew house and all those kinds of things. That was a big part of my puppetry career too, like loading and unloading the tour bus and all.
Sure. What then took you back to the East Coast?
Or
New England for that matter.
Yeah, sure. When I was out in Oregon, I'd been professionally brewing there about 10 years. At that point, I was at a place called Laurelwood. And I'd been exploring ideas of starting Wunderkammer out there. And it had a focus on foraged ingredients, had a focus on making mixed culture beer. And then I took a trip back east because my wife is from that same area where the puppet theater is, which also happens to be the same area that the Hill Farmstead brewery is.
Hill Farmstead?
Yeah.
Sounds familiar.
They're a little place up in the Northeast, worth checking out.
Sure.
Wherever in the area.
So I've heard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd connected with Sean years back. He actually loaned me a bunch of equipment for my wedding. I brewed up a bunch of beer, and we got married over at Bread and Puppet as well. And anyway, I'd stayed in connection with them and told him I was planning on opening a brewery out in Oregon, and he invited me to come back and work with him. And since I have family there and my wife's family's there, it seemed like a no-brainer. They were just undergoing a big expansion there.
About what year was that?
That was beginning of 2015.
Okay.
Yeah. And during the course of my work there, I was offered to start a side brand, which was awesome, very generous. And me, as well as another friend of mine, both did this, where we started side brands out of Hill Farmstead. And yeah, and so my concept was Wunderkammer. I was going to make mixed culture beer, bring in foraged ingredients. My very first beer was one made with sumac. My second beer was one made with lichen and mushroom. and yeah, kind of off to the races at that point.
Sure. What what did you then start to pull on through this idea of Wunderkammer? Obviously, the idea of foraged ingredients is key to it. But talk to me about your, there's plenty of foraged ingredients to pull from, and it's one thing to make stunt beers, and it's another thing to make fully realized, expressive beers with a culture that's working in sync with ingredients, and managing all of those pieces. Were there some kind of fundamentals behind it? Because at the same time, Hill Farmstead also has their own mixed culture program. Also pulls, dandelions from the field and makes Virame, and also is operating in a similar space with some of these beers. There's some crossover there. How would you differentiate Wunderkammer?
My project really started out as wanting to blend my art background, blend my foraging practice, along with the mixed culture beer. And since the beginning, we'd been using different cultures. I've never used the one from Hill Farmstead itself. And for me, it's really about the experience, almost performing a little bit, and going out into the woods and spending time out there gathering the materials. And that is an aspect of what they do as well, but it's pretty central to what I do. And a lot of it is about exploring how those things come together and continuing to iterate things. I might work with similar materials like sumac, like goldenrod, like yarrow, but I'm using them in various kinds of iterations each time. I haven't really made the same beer twice. The whole concept, you don't step into the same river twice, I feel like goes the same for seasonality, goes the same for beer production, for where the culture is, where the landscape is at,
Sure. I want to talk about, then take this in two directions. And one, again, try to drill down on what that creative process looks like, where you, how you take the inspiration from these natural ingredients and actually figure out how to make a good beer with them. But then also kind of get into some of the technicals behind it, because you have a lo-fi kind of approach to beer making. It's an intentional approach, but it's also not a, compared to brew systems that you have brewed on at other places in the past. It is a purposely, I don't want to call it rustic, but it's definitely a process that's meant to kind of strip down to the very core of beer making. I want to talk about both of those things. Yep. But before we do that, AccuBrew now monitors specific gravity to ensure consistent results and detect problems before they ruin a batch. The AccuBrew system is designed to give you unprecedented insight into the fermentation process. Monitor gravity, fermentation activity, clarity, and temperature, schedule reminders, and receive alerts anywhere, anytime. AccuBrew's CIP-ready device is designed to stay out of your way, They know your time and space is precious, and they take up as little of both as possible. No more samples, no cleaning, and no calibration. Set it and forget it. To learn more about AccuBrew, head on over to accubrew.io. Also, ProBrew is excited to announce they are currently featuring short lead times between 2 and 4 weeks for their in-stock ProFill rotary can fillers. These can fillers run at speeds between 100 and 600 plus cans per minute, while achieving precise and consistent filling volumes not achievable by most inline and mobile fillers. For more information, fill out their contact form on www.probrew.com or email contactus@probrew.com to learn exactly how they can take your operations to the next level. ProBrew, brew your beer. Well, let's start by talking a bit about, the framework of the way that you brew at Wunderkammer.
Okay.
Describe to us the technical system that you've built to make beer.
Yeah, it is about as simple as brewing gets. It is located on a farm that was formerly used as a creamery and a cheese-making facility for the landowners there. When they stopped making cheese, I took over their cheese house, which basically consists of a large vat. I had some lauter plates fabricated for the vat, and I have a very simple mill, I mash in onto that system. I've made some modifications.
A good old dairy
to it.
tank mash tun. Okay.
Good old dairy tank. Yeah, I had a large copper kettle fabricated from this person in Virginia, and I built up a little kind of stove for it, so.
What volume is the copper kettle?
It can do up to 10 hectoliter.
Okay.
Yeah. So a decent amount, which is about the same as you can fit into one of those totes, which will come into play later on.
Sure.
So I mash into there, very simple single infusion system using spring water that I collect in a tote. On-demand heat going into the mash tun.
You collect into a tote? Is it?
Yeah. So it's spring water. So it's basically kind of on demand, Yeah. It's not a well. So if you don't collect it, you might run dry.
So there's a spring on the property and you just collect the water. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same that they use for their animals, for their house, things like that. Collect into the, mash into the old cheese vat, and then recirculate and run off into the large copper kettle. I fire the copper kettle with the sort of rounded ends of dimensional lumber when people take trees down and cut lumber for themselves out of it. There's the sort of rounded ends that they can't really use, so they're kind of become scrap free basically. And they're often soft woods like pines and things like that, which burn fast, burn hot, which is totally appropriate for what I'm doing. And so I'll boil in there, and then while I'm doing that, I'll empty out the cheese vat, take out the lauter plates, and it's a dairy vessel, so there's like no nooks and crannies to it. There's just very straight stainless steel, and I can clean that out and use it as a cool ship. So in wintertime, I'll keep it in there overnight. Summertime, I'll use a heat exchanger and just use the cool ship to hold it as I knock out. And I knock out into a tote. I bring that.
So, but a direct fire kettle, wood fire brew system.
Exactly. Yeah. It's very basic, but it does everything I need it to. So.
It also gives you a lot of character, I imagine, to the beer that you're brewing into it because of the nature of both the copper and the that kind of direct heat. Yeah,
that, and also a ton of versatility. I mean, you can throw botanicals at any aspect. I mean, you're not messing around with the calandria. You're not messing around with some kind of filtration that it's not going to get through. Using the cool ship. I mean, sure, yeah, it's largely used as for people for spontaneous fermentation, but it is just, again, a very basic piece of brewing equipment used in lager production.
Sure.
So just being able to use that is another opportunity for me to drop a little bit of protein, maybe do an extended contact with some botanicals or hops or whatever else before I send it into the tote and bring it over to the cave.
The cave. Before we get into fermentation, I'm still, I've visited Scratch, and of course did a podcast with them. They're working on a even larger, direct fire wood fired kettle.
Yeah, they told me who made their kettle.
Yeah.
That's who I went to.
Okay, perfect. A lot of commonalities there, obviously, of their background in forage brewing, and absolutely beautiful experience. And it's so, I love watching brewers who get down into that very core. You could call it a historical approach, but at the same time, it's as relevant now as it ever was.
Yeah.
It is just an intentional process in a different kind of way.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of it, we don't really need breweries to be super large anymore. We don't need to. They don't need to be these colossal, and as a matter of fact, seem to be going away. Some of the large regional breweries. I think it's fine to have a multitude of breweries that operate on a smaller level that's more connected with agriculture, the agricultural roots of where brewing came from.
Sure. And as long as there are consumers that'll support that vision and, are willing to pay a price for a beer that is so manual.
Yeah. That's true.
But at the same time, it also, you're reducing some expenses that come in, in that process of brewing from the way that you do it.
Yeah.
Now it has to require a lot more hands-on attention. I mean, all brewing does, especially on the hot side, but you're having to stoke a fire and keep a fire going. You're having to manage temperature in the kettle, by a wood and how the fire is burning. Those are some challenges that brewers typically don't have to face these days.
Yeah. No, I mean, for me, a brew day is a whole day endeavor. I don't have another mash coming in afterwards. Whatever's
4 turns on the wood-fired copper. No,
it's what I do that day. And it's interesting too. I was describing the winter versus the summer brewing, and it matches well with the daylight hours. The winter brewing takes about 8 hours. The summer brewing takes more like 12 hours. So it kind of matches the daylight in that kind of way.
What changes the process? Is it just the speed of cooling then?
Oh, I can just send it into the cool ship and then I'm done with it for the day. I can go on to cleaning. I'm not having to then send it into another vessel, bring it over to the cave, knock it out over there, and then clean up everything at the end of the day. So,
well, let's talk a little bit about the cave and this fermentation approach.
Yeah. Yeah. So the cave was a later addition to their cheese operation. And it is just simply a man-made cave. It has walls that are 15 feet thick. And it's kind of partially excavated, partially built above ground. And it's just a super consistent place for me to ferment and age my beer. So basically I bring it over with a tractor, knock it out into a fermenter with some mixed culture in it, rest there for a couple weeks.
You say a fermenter, what is?
Oh yeah, no, it's a shallow, it's not a cylinder conical tank, but it is stainless steel. And yeah, it's just where I keep my culture.
You say shallow, so I assume you've thought about the tank geometry on this mixed culture farmhouse saison.
Yeah, I mean,
fermenter.
It's ideally there's no issue if it was a cylinder conical. I just don't happen to have one. It's what I have, and it works. It works pretty well. I mean, the advantage being if it was cylinder conical, I could probably do more harvesting off of it and things like that, and move things around that way. But by and large, it works just fine for me.
And so there's no temperature control then on the fermenter. It is simply picking up the ambient temperature from the cave.
Yeah. No, all of my yeast cultures are selected for the high temperature tolerance.
Interesting.
Yeah, like Belgian or Norwegian or whatever else.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about that then. Since you are opting into some of these constraints.
Yeah.
And you are then having to choose ingredients or process yeast in this kind of way, in a way that's going to fit into some of the constraints that you've now selected for yourself in this. How did you then go about finding cultures that were going to work in, and I imagine a cave is both going to be pretty cool for most of the year and then, and maybe not fluctuate that much. And if it's, hitting these 50 or 60 degree kind of consistent temperatures as I would expect a
Yeah,
cave would.
that's pretty accurate, right? Between 50, I mean, I work in Celsius, but it's usually, between 12 and 19 Celsius. That's the whole fluctuation of the year.
And that seems to be, in a lot of ways, actually a little cooler range than a lot of people would ferment some of these, say, mixed culture and farmhouse focused beers. Mm-hmm. How did you go about working through which cultures you're going to make beer with that were going to work in this kind of constrained environment?
Yeah, I mean, basically, I'm looking for a sack strain that's going to be able to tolerate those higher temperatures and have it be a great temperature range.
You say
that
higher temperatures, but they feel like lower temperatures to me.
So that's where they start, but they'll often get up into 26 to 28, 30 degrees.
Okay.
Sometimes I'm knocking out 24, 25 degrees. Maybe there's fluctuation there.
So fairly wide range then, and also driven some by seasonality.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can only predict so much how much it's going to cool overnight. And I might tack on a few hours or a few less, but it really depends on whether it's, negative 10 degrees outside or more like zero,
How did you go about selecting or isolating or building some of the core cultures you use? And for those cultures that you use often, not like, how wide is that library? How many do you keep going at a time, and how do you then choose, for each beer that you're making? And then walk me through your process to step up while keeping that whole culture in sync.
Yeah, I'd say when I'm pitching new culture, and often that would be a lab culture, it's something that I tend to choose Brett based on some of the more kind of citrus aspects of it. Mm-hmm. That those are flavor profiles that I just gravitate towards. And at the same time though, there's definitely a fair amount of entropy in it. I mean, just the fact that I'm using a cool ship in wintertime, there's a good amount of inoculation that can be happening there before it even meets with my house culture. So I usually start at that as a point of deviation that from the lab culture itself, and as successive generations come on, I just try and stay really in tune with the current status of the culture. I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm trying to guide it with a heavy hand. I'm just trying to make modifications as things go along. If I feel like the culture is leaning more towards acidity, I might try and tamp it down with brewing a more higher IBU wort, just to inhibit some of that lactic acid bacteria. And there's various kinds of levers that I'll pull throughout the year, depending on where the culture is going. Sometimes I'll be culturing up, former bottles that tasted really great, and that might become part of the culture there, or that might become part of the culture in an individual barrel that it goes into.
Mm-hmm. When you are working with lab cultures for a new brew, are you pulling on, because you mentioned choosing Brett based on citrus character, but also, choosing sack strains that are going to have that kind of wide temperature, variation and be, productive throughout that range. Are you working with labs that may give you all of that in a blend, or are you, blending some of these cultures based on, on the, kind of sack strain plus Brett strains and building your own mix for these?
Yeah, usually I'll build my own mix. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't tend to go in for too many of the really big Brett blends that you see some of the producers doing.
Why not?
Well, first off, some of it's like unfamiliarity with some of the products that they do, and often as well too, it's hard to believe that there's going to be a lot of fidelity over successive generations to that initial strain, and I feel like there's still a lot of kitchen sink kind of approaches to it, and you'll still see things like this is funk, this is funky. It's like that word doesn't have as much meaning as they think it does. It doesn't quite resonate with me.
The branding throws you off even.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And and so I'm looking for specific attributes. I'm looking for
There's some aggressive names that they throw in with funk also, which may be a little off-putting. Who knows?
Yeah, no, definitely. And part of the power of mixed culture beer is that I find it very transportive it brings you to a time and place, but I don't always want that time and place to be a barnyard. So it can be fine now and then, but yeah.
What flavors do you like your mixed culture, your Sack and Brett blends to evoke? And obviously some of this is going to change beer to beer, but if it's not Barnyard, what do you try to optimize for, both in terms of acidity, in terms of what you would say in terms of funk character, and in terms of the way that all of these fermentation flavors then impact? How do you?
Yeah, I mean,
do you start with a vision for what it's going to taste like and try to build it, or does this whole concept of what the beer is going to be evolve as you taste and you steer and direct?
No, that's a great question. I'm very much closer to the second, to the latter. I really feel like at every stage you have to approach it as a new beer. Like whatever dreams and aspirations you had for that beer going into it, you're faced with the reality of what that beer actually is, and I feel like if you're not tuning into that, paying attention to what it's trying to tell you, you're going to miss something.
There's a bit of the director's art, if we go back to the puppetry background there, where you are working with actors that also have their own idea of how they're going to perform in this performance that you are then the director of. At the same time, you can't let the actors do whatever they want to do, or else you'll have a incoherent and lacking cohesion kind of performance. You have to pull that together, but you also have to respect the creative contributions of all of those actors in the performance.
No, I totally agree. I mean, there's a lot of art metaphors that I can think of, especially in painting. Sometimes you have to make broad strokes. Sometimes you have to erase the work that you had your heart set on up until that point, and introduce something else that's going to shift the dynamic of it. Or I personally, I came from a kind of a printing background, so just sort of working things in layers, and knowing that you're working with whatever it is you previously printed before you start reducing the print and making another color on top.
Oh, I love the printmaking, the metaphor there. Let's talk about, maybe walk through a beer. And walk through, some of your process for it, a beer that may have changed, through that, and how you made some, kind of responsive decisions, to adjust and massage, in various directions. Maybe there's something that you could walk me through. I'm just curious about how you feel through this process.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I mean, often the base that I'm making is going to be in response to what I can harvest out of the area at that point. So, for example, I'll harvest yarrow, for example, in early July, and then it just becomes how I decide to use it, what malts I'm going to use in combination with it, and that's a whole series of decisions in itself that comes together.
How do you make those?
So, I often liken yarrow to having almost kind of a Sprite or a ginger kind of characteristic to them. So some years I might be interested in pulling out this sort of darker version of it, and almost like a ginger cake kind of aspect to it. And to that end, I'll start incorporating some dark malts. I'll start incorporating different kinds of grains in order to sort of give those kinds of similar bakery impressions, that the bake shop style thing, and then just deciding what kind of wood it's going to go into, just based off of how it's coming out, how much of that ginger aspect it's expressing. whether it needs a more sort of aggressive wood to go with it or a more neutral one. So using some application of wood, I'll do that and just see how it develops over the months, and then maybe it's perfect the way it is. Maybe it needs some more yarrow. Maybe it needs something else entirely. Maybe it's gonna become a fruit beer in the future or something like that. So I kind of build them up as a different series of stock,
Sure. Are there specific malts that you find work within your general mixed culture approach to beer making? I assume that you're making more pale mixed culture beers than darker mixed culture beers, just given that is the where most consumers are for these days. But at the same time, you want malt that will function and provide and then you're going to mash that in a way that is going to feed this mixed culture for its longer fermentation process. Are there some ingredients that you find yourself leaning on more than others?
Yeah, I mean, I use pretty exclusively local malt. So whether it's grown in Vermont or malted in Vermont or grown in Massachusetts or grown in Vermont and malted in Massachusetts or whatever, but I try and work with as locally produced malt and grains as I can. And I really do use a lot of different raw grains as well. Some from as close as from behind the brewery. As I mentioned, it's located on a farm, so there's fields of rye, fields of wheat that are grown right there. And I'll use those on occasion as well. Or maybe collaborating with another local person using local grains as well, a baker or something like that, make a kvass style beer, something like that. So above and beyond that, that is a kind of a self-imposed limitation I put on myself to use as local ingredients as I can, just because I want to really focus on what makes our area in Vermont so special, and try and make beers that are as close to the landscape there as I can.
Sure. Would love to come back to some of this culture question again and understand how you move it away from the barnyard that you don't enjoy as much, and and also again find the proper expression of acidity, as well as the kind of pleasant for lack of a better word, funk character in subtle ways that support complexity and depth. But before we do that, you like wildly aromatic IPAs and tropical lagers? Good thing Omega designed thiolized yeast for just that reason. Thiolized yeast are a new tool for brewers to bring intense guava and passion fruit aromas out of your malt and hops. And wait, there's more. Omega yeast makes yeast to order with a consistent 1-week lead time, ensuring peak freshness and reliability. Also, sustainability doesn't have to cost you more. Try Robert's Polypro's multi-pack can handles designed for sustainability and cost savings. Grip pack rings are biodegradable and average 5 cents per unit. Craft pack carriers are recyclable and designed with 30% less plastic. Plus, you can save up to 25% on costs. Enjoy easy application with inline applicators and 24/7 support. It's easy to go green with these multi-pack handles. Visit go.robertspolypro.com/cbbpod to request free samples and start saving today. And this episode is sponsored by Yakima Chief Hops, the 100% grower-owned hop supplier whose mission is to connect hop growers and world-class brewers. It's more than a box of hops, it's supporting family farms. Yakima Chief Hops is proud to have an established return-to-grower program, which redistributes an average of 75% of their business earnings back to the family farms who grow the hops in your beer. Where you buy your ingredients matters, and with Yakima Chief Hops, it's more than a box of hops. Learn more at yakimachief.com/return-growers. So let's talk a little bit again about that culture piece. I'm still curious about this.
I'm not trying to evade the question, but
you've listened to the podcast before. You know that it's my job to try to
absolutely
to keep harassing you with these questions until I'm at least somewhat satisfied. But I am curious about that because again, we have the cliches that hang out there in the world of brewing, especially in mixed culture brewing, and Barnyard is one of them. But I love listening to the way brewers articulate different kinds of ideas for flavors that they're trying to achieve, and then, manifest that with process, to achieve that. And so I'm curious about how you work with yours in order to, create, ultimately create some of these flavors that are more in tune with what you want to put out in the world.
Yeah, sure. I briefly mentioned before that I find mixed culture beer being very transportive. And I feel, as opposed to making IPAs, which I've certainly done for a lot of my career, it's almost a different way of exploring flavor altogether. I feel like a lot of IPAs, they kind of exist more or less on a spider graph of citrus high notes or floral or bitterness or whatever tropical or. But I feel like the best mixed culture beers that I've had have been transportive. They'll bring you to the woods, bring you to the to the water, bring you to all these different places, and I
The
feel
farmhouse in the Belgian countryside.
exactly. Yeah. No, not just that,
Or
but
gritty urban Brussels, for that matter.
yeah. I mean, I feel like for me, it definitely connects with memory and places a lot more than just as simple as the spider graph of flavor profile. And for me, part of that, what connects those things is using botanicals, using mixed culture, because what you get out of a result of those different combinations is so much more and beyond what you can get otherwise. And just think of the flavor profile of earthy. People talk about earthiness, but they mean everything from like herbal mintiness to really like mushroom kind of flavors. And there's just like so many interesting and varied layers to what an earthy profile is. And, and some people don't want any of it, but I feel, that is one thing that I really enjoy digging down on. I'd mentioned that I'd made a beer with mushrooms and lichen and things like that before. And, if that doesn't transport you into, taking a walk in the woods, nothing in the beer world can. I feel like, a lot of the different, for example, hops themselves are an herb. So, I mean, just using the broad spectrum of other useful plants out there that have or could be used for brewing, historically, is really fertile territory. So, for example, I've mentioned yarrow a few times. That's about as ancient of a brewing herb as you can get.
Sure.
Other things, like sweet gale and all these other kinds of wonderful herbs out there. We're using them with mixed culture, using them in different contexts. There's just so much you can draw on there.
Is there what are some of the levers that you pull with your mixed culture fermentation to again keep it from developing excessive acidity? I mean, imagine you're using the same hopping tricks that a lot of folks are doing in that regard. But in terms of developing, funk character to it, you're not trying to have that overpower, the same kind of herbal component. You want to try to keep that gentle and soft. Are there some ways through that fermentation that you steer it in that direction?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do feel just the fact that I'm using a sack strain to do the vast amount of heavy lifting in the fermentation. So what that'll typically look for me on like a 10 Plato wort or something like that is, within a few days, I'm down to 1.5, 1.3, something like that. And, at that point, I'll give it maybe a week or so in order to.
Is this a diastaticus sack strain?
Often they are. Yeah. I also use like the Norwegian stuff, which isn't all that. But it'll drop it'll drop a lot of yeast during that. I also try and select for heavy flocculating because I have no glycol in my brewery. So I try and leave a good amount of that yeast behind, and then I'll send it over into oak, and that's where you see that last half point Plato attenuate, and that's you can see that happen over the next month and a half, 2 months, and then from then on, it's just allowing it time to harmonize, figuring out what the next step is for it, and where it's going to go.
So you're pretty much well, I wouldn't say starving, but you're limiting the amount of anything fermentable that's left for that culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to keep it working in a more minimal kind of way.
Yeah. I mean, that is a big part of it, especially since I don't have some of those levers that would help stabilize the beer. I'm not filtering it in any kind of way. I'm not dropping the temperature and sort of making modifications to its behavior.
How long does a typical fermentation take then for you?
Yeah, I mean that first phase of fermentation, I mean it'll usually start fermenting within the first 6 hours. You'll see some evidence of activity, and usually within that first 24 hours, it probably drops about four Plato, something like that. And then in the first 48 hours, it's pretty much within a point of Plato of where it's gonna be before I send it over to oak.
So after just a few days, you're moving it out of your stainless and into oak?
No. After a few days, it's basically it's done. It's finished its Saccharomyces attenuation. At that point, I'm just letting all of that sac drop out of suspension. And the Brett will still carry over, and we'll still act on it over those months in oak.
So then how long does it spend in stainless before you move it into oak?
So it's usually about 2 weeks.
2 weeks, yeah. So pretty typical.
Yeah. And, again, I'm not chilling it before I send it over or anything. So I'm just, and the main part of that is really just to, I mean, I've done oak fermentations and things like that as well, but the main part of that is just to carry over as little yeast as I need to.
Yeah.
It goes into barrel often looking pretty, I wouldn't say exactly hazy IPA, but unfiltered IPA. Yeah.
How long do your beers tend to spend in residence in oak? And I imagine some of this is going to be seasonal because some of the temperature seasonal temperature shifts may adjust, how long something might need to be in there. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, each barrel has started to develop its own kind of culture, its own kind of microflora in there. And, some will produce great tasting beer very quickly. And for me, very quickly is 3-4 months. Some of it will take a year. And sometimes it's just kind of it's developed where it needs to, and it's waiting for fruit to come in. It's waiting for whatever I'm going to take out of the woods and use in the next beer, whatever kind of maceration or whatever.
Are these, 50-gallon wine barrels, 55-gallon spirit barrels? I mean, what do you, or larger puncheons? What do you find? Or do you use some mix of all of these things?
It's usually a mix. I mean, I'd say the most of the things in my cellar are puncheons. I just like that amount of beer. So 500 liters. It's just an easy amount of beer to package in a day, and it just seems to work out really well for me. I like the degree of surface area that you get to the beer itself. I feel like it develops in a I don't know. It just seems more rounded all in all. I feel like the smaller barrels are a lot less predictable.
Interesting.
That's just in my experience. Maybe other people are better masters of the smaller barrel, smaller format barrel.
And so you'll leave a culture and pull off a fair amount of beer, but probably still leave some beer along with the culture and then load another beer on top of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Not a full on Solera in that sense, but
no, I don't try and leave a bunch of beer. I usually I'll usually drop dead yeast. I'll usually do things like that, as well as try and get as much of the beer out of there as I can, whether it means there's a partial barrel I'm topping off somewhere or whatever it is.
How do you then clean them between batches?
The barrels?
Yeah.
Oh, I've actually installed ports at the bottom of all of them. Just
Yeah.
very simple 1.5 tri-clamp to 1 inch taper screw at the bottom of them, and I'll actually put a valve at the bottom of it, and that works out well for me because I don't have a forklift, and I don't even have one of those like walk behind materials lifts. So barrels are better off if they can just stay in place, and once I'm emptied out the barrel, I can just spray out the ullage, or I can even run a cycle on it with something if it's and then that's actually going to have a lot to do with what the status of that barrel is, whether it needs a fuller reset or whether it can just simply be basically filled back up. In any case, I usually try not to leave a bunch of yeast at the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah. Do anything to limit oxygen then in between those?
Well, I'm typically pushing out with CO2, and then before I'm going back into a barrel, if it hasn't been purged, I'll purge out of the barrel. Yeah, and I'm
just to avoid that acetobacter. And
that
potential.
And also, I mean,
keep the beer healthy.
I haven't quite converted all my barrels over, but I'm also filling them from below as well too. So I'm not using the racking cane, which is a little bit more aggressive, up and over and down and all over.
Sure. A gentle fill pushes that CO2 up with it and keeps it under a blanket there.
It does. Yeah, you can purge out the barrel from the bottom and then start filling from the bottom, nice and gentle.
Makes sense. Let's talk about using some of these herbal ingredients and foraged ingredients.
Yep.
You mentioned yarrow. How do you use yarrow? Hot side, cold side, how do you
everywhere.
Okay. Do you use any special process? Do you make teas out of these?
Yeah. I mean, and that's often when I'm researching something new that I want to use, it'll start from observing it out in nature, or maybe I'll read a text that says, this used to be used in a gruit of some sort back in whenever. But especially if you spend a lot of time looking through some of these nature guides, like the Peterson guide, if you turn to the back, which is a popular edibles guide, you turn to the back of it and it has everything divided out by its use. So whether it's something that you can make into candy, something you can make into a steamed green, and there's like a large section of tea. And it's often in the Peterson guide, it's divided by season. So you can actually look by season and see what they suggest might be something you could use in tea. And I feel like that's a pretty good place to start for anybody who's kind of interested in it, because often if it's making some sort of tea and has some kind of strong aromatic impact, then that's usually a pretty good indication that it might work well in beer. Actually, the first time I used yarrow was when I was out in Oregon. I came across, we were staying in a state park in the Columbia Gorge, and me and my wife just came across this huge field of yarrow, and it's actually she tipped me off to it because she was just very familiar with it. It grows everywhere, and her being a lifelong gardener.
We have some yarrow in our yard now too.
Yeah. It's a great plant, and it just really loves sunny, well-drained soil. And we came across it, and it's just so aromatic. And I remember from my Greek background having chai vunu, which is this kind of a mountain tea, and it had that very similar kind of resiny, strong aromatic. We picked a bunch of it right then and there, and I was home brewing with it at that time. Is actually the kind of that evolution might be a little bit interesting too if we have time. But there was this project that was put on by this guy Eric Steen around Oregon. He's done it. He's done it in Colorado here as well.
Yeah, he started in Colorado Springs, the focus on the beer, and then and he was at Hopworks Hub in Oregon, Portland.
Yeah, he was doing these beers made by walking type things where brewers would get together with rangers or whoever else and go on a walk. And for me, that was one of the first times commercially. I mean, I've been doing it on a homebrew level, but one of the first times commercially that that I started bringing forageables into the beers. And yeah, that was one of the first impetuses of that for me. But in terms of places that I might use yarrow, typically it's, with the versatility of my system, I can do anything from throwing it in with the mash,
Sure.
or throwing it into the boil kettle, throwing it into the cool ship. I often don't, unless I'm doing it like a side fermentation, I'm often not introducing it into the culture itself, like fermenting with herbs in the culture. I usually try and leave that so it can be pretty versatile in its own right. But yeah, I've definitely done it in the packaging tank, done sort of longer macerations and
what's the difference between, say, like a cold edition versus a hot edition, or something where it's gotten, spent some time on heat?
Yeah, I mean, it's really dependent on the herb. Yarrow is one of those that you can throw it into a boil, and a year later it will still be in there in the barrel. I feel like it's a very salient herb, and you can certainly introduce more of it. But I feel it's one of those things that's just really herb by herb dependent. And I feel like a lot of those that might be really resinous. I mean, I imagine it'd be similar if you're using any of those types of herbs that have thujon in them, like sage or rosemary, or those various kinds of herbs that will have that really intense resiny character. I feel like those translate best over the long term. Something using something in a more short term, like a cold steep, post fermentation, post barrel aging. Those things often more like flowers, like lilacs or something like that. If you're using those, I feel like those are a little too ephemeral to try and age over long term with it.
They volatilize a bit more in a hot environment.
Yeah, definitely that, and just they'll just fade over that year, or however long it takes aging. So those types of things I'll usually just do in a small tank maceration, just really see how it develops and be ready to take it off when it tells you it's done.
What are some of your other favorite foraged ingredients to pull in, and how have you found to use them to make some compelling beers?
Yeah, I mean, my first and foremost was sumac, because it grows all over in Vermont. And I feel like, again, just being interested in these kinds of citrus profiles, there's not a lot in Vermont that matches up very well with that. I mean, if I allowed myself to, there'd be all kinds of citrus I'd love to throw into beers, especially lime flavors like that. So I often try and focus on some of those where I find them in the Vermont landscape, and sumac is one of those. Another one is sea berry or sea buckthorn. You don't often get that profile in Vermont, so I explore it where I can. Some of the other ones that I really enjoy using are besides yarrow, goldenrod. I use goldenrod quite a bit. I mean, a lot of them are just kind of once I'll try something, or maybe a couple times. But any kind of intense flower, elderflower, lilac, linden flower, a lot of those I love to use those. They're just so intoxicating in their own right, that floral aspect of them.
How do you add them in? What kind of threshold do you need to add these floral elements, typically on the cold side, to achieve some sort of flavor that's going to be noticeable? Because obviously you've got ephemeral flavors from these flowers that are working in a beer that's got some flavor, to it that's pretty significant already. Yeah. How do you make them convey, and how do you find a way to balance those two?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's trial and error. I try and just take notes when I do something, get a sense of
Do you
how
bench
many.
test on any of these individuals, with some of these ingredients before you go in and make the additions?
Yeah, often I'll have like a series of demijohns, so 50 liter glass winemaking kind of containers, and I'll often do macerations in there. And I've in places like that is where I've explored with spruce tips is another one that I really love to use a whole lot. But I'll also use the tips from pine, which they actually call candles. They kind of look straight up and down like candles. Pine tips, fir tips, cedar branches, things like that. And for some of those, I'll use them in small macerations just to check, what happens with extended contact time. What happens if you leave it on there for 6 months as opposed to, a week. So that's often where I'm
Have you found any unexpected, learning from that? Things that have worked in different ways than you might have assumed they would?
Yeah, I have found some things affect differently. Like there was, I often will use those for sort of goofy projects as well. So messing around with vegetables and one vegetable I like that's extremely aromatic is fennel. And I don't know if that one will ever come out, but but it is intense. And whereas I was just hoping to get some of that more ethereal aspect of the fennel, it brings its whole self to it. And there's definitely a depth of vegetable character to it too that it's undeniable.
Do you ever blend back portions of those demijohns into a larger batch just so that you can balance the kind of exact or more exact kind of level of something?
Yeah, I mean, often they are very intense, high, fruit or vegetable or whatever it is to beer ratio. So I will often blend it back to find where I think it's palatable. I mean, I don't feel like often I'm trying to be extremely overwhelming in the characteristics that I'm using of these materials. So I will try and find a place that still communicates that it's beer.
Sure. Are there any other kind of unconventional, whether they're combinations or of ingredients that you found have produced interesting beers working in concert together?
Yeah, I have. This probably goes back to my side project days at Hill Farmstead, but I was just this. I had a bunch of birch sap, which is a season that comes right after maple, and it's commonly used for people make syrup out of it as well as kind of drinks. But I got my hands on a bunch of birch sap and used that as the mash-in liquid, and used it for an iteration of a beer that I'd made with a friend of mine before that uses a lot of juniper branches and cedar and fir and spruce. So it was kind of a interpretation of a Gotlandrika. And but in our own kind of version of it. But yeah, the birch sap.
Vermont Landstrika, yeah.
The birch sap aspect of it really punched it up, made it actually really intense. It needed the whole thing needed to be blended back with a barrel of some well-aged beer, but once it was beautiful.
Sure. Well, as we get on here, let's zoom out a little bit. Wunderkammer started as a side project at Hill Farmstead. It has been your kind of creative project. It's now your brewery, and now it's your sole focus in brewing. What do you hope to achieve with Wunderkammer, in the next 5 to 10 years? What is left out there for you to explore? What do you hope that that people understand the Wunderkammer brand as, and what else do you want to do here in the world of beer?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I often feel like I hear these questions go out like, where do you want to be? I feel like I am where I want to be, and I'm doing pretty much what I want to be doing. And it might sound kind of narrow-minded, but kind of more of the same, because for me, that is a perpetual process of exploration, perpetual discovering. It doesn't mean it won't lead me in kinds of odd directions or sideways or all kinds of other directions. But yeah, I'm pretty much doing what I want to be doing right now, and I feel like that's the best way we can be, And sorry, what was the other part? And in terms of what people.
Is there anything else you want to accomplish, and how do you want people to view Wunderkammer?
Oh, well, I have pretty much zero control of how people view my project.
That's not true. That's not true. You condition that in everything that you make and in every communication and every interaction you have with people.
Yeah, but they might just think I'm crazy. So, but
Hey, that's a noble goal in and of itself.
Yeah, I hope that when people try some of my beers, they are having a great experience with somebody that they care about, sharing something. And more than anything else, I really hope that it just connects with people. I mean, it goes from my experience in being a puppeteer in the back, where you sort of gather a small audience around yourself. And, I'm not trying to speak to everybody. It doesn't matter to me if everybody has an opinion or has a love for the kinds of projects I'm doing. But I hope that it connects with people, either because they expect it or because they don't expect it, or whatever. But that sort of connection comes through the bottle.
That sounds like a beautiful thing, and I can't wait to get up there to northern Vermont and see it in person one of these days. Hopefully, sometime early next year.
Yeah.
But that is a great place to bring this to a close. G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and reliability with 24/7 service and support. Carry Biofine is a natural and economical clarification aid available from BSG. Try Old Orchard's flavored craft juice concentrate blends in your next craft beverage. AccuBrew helps you detect problems before they ruin a batch. ProBrew has rotary can fillers in stock with a 2 to 4 week lead time. Omega's thiolized yeasts bring intense guava and passion fruit aromas out of your malt and hops. Go green with multi-pack handles from Robert's Polypro. And Yakova Chief Hops' mission is to connect hop growers and world-class brewers. If you've enjoyed this podcast and any others, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button. Some of Vasily's thoughts on rusticity in farmhouse and saison beers show up in the next issue of Craft Beer and Brewing, in a story that Kate Brunot has written for us. If people want to learn more about Wunderkammer, Vasily, where do they find more about you all?
Probably the easiest place is at Wunderkammer Beer Manufacturer on Instagram. I have a website, www.wunderkammerbeer.com. Those are, probably Instagram is the most up to date.
Cool. Well, it's been wonderful talking to you about your mixed culture approach to brewing, foraging, making beer on a wood-fired copper kettle. In this very intentional but also historic kind of way. It's interesting and inspiring, and thanks for talking with me.
It's been a pleasure, Jamie. Thank you so much.
Cheers. This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.